All right, welcome folks to Infinite Theater chat room number 3. I don't see anything up yet. We're having a little soft opening here as we try and also get on Facebook.
It says you're live on Facebook.
It says live on Facebook in mine.
All right. So these chat rooms have an actual function. It's not just us having fun. They are for the writers, and today we have in the chat room, we have Ned Cox and Alexandria Haber. And we are discussing the early draft of their play, The Silent Woman. And we have discovered that, in fact, these discussions can be of use. Even Oren, Safdie, and Paul Van Dyck, the 2 previous playwrights, were very happy with this. So this is for the playwrights. I'm going to, as is the infinite tradition, light the candle. The muse is now in for Alex and for Ned. And I want to welcome the panelists. So we'll get to you, Alex and Ned. Just wave there for us in a second. I'm going around. I'm not quite sure how everybody's screen is, but I have Amelia Sargison here, just below Ned. Amelia, an actress, of course, Montrealer. We lost her to Stratford, but she was last seen on the Centaur stage taking a bite of the apple from the tree of knowledge. Thank you very much, Amelia. You were in on some of the early readings of this script, so you're going to have an actor's point of view from the inside, so that's great. Alice Aberson, we have at the bottom of my screen, anyhow. Alice, welcome. A playwright in your own right, graduate of both Harvard and NTS, and also a member of our Playwrights unit that is not functioning at the moment. Unfortunately, Alice, welcome. You would have had a play on at the Centaur had the pandemic not happened, I believe. So as with many of us, you're a casualty of all of this. But while the theaters may be dark at the moment, when they return, there's going to be a huge hunger for live theater. So that's what this is about. We're preparing the scripts for the future theater that people are going to be hungry for. And going around in a circle, Ida Holmes. Ida, of course, is the artistic director of Centaur Theater. Ida, you also directed a play of Alex's Alice in the World We Live in the fall at the Center. It was part of the Centaur season. It was a huge hit. So you're talking here from the inside of knowledge of Alex. And then in the Center is one of the great actors. We have many great actors in English Montreal. Alain Goulem. Alain, and of course has partnered with Alex Haber, both on the stage and as a director of her work, but also in real life, and produced a few great productions in real life. Alain, so it looks like the Habs are going to make the playoffs this year after all.
Yes, it's a weird world, isn't it?
Okay, so that's the subject of our next chat. So the play, I should say right off, we've already had some comments. If you are with us on the Zoom, you can send questions. We'll try and deal with them towards the latter half of this chat room. The Silent Woman by Ned Cox and Alexandria Haber is open to discussion. I will just say, just off the bat, already some people have written some comments in, and Christina has written that is the play, she loved the play, has read it, and it's much more enchanting than The Woman in Black. Now, The Woman in Black was the longest running non-musical in the West End. So you're in good company there, you guys. That's a good place to start off with. This is an early draft, right? And there will be, and because your play has so many styles and structures and allusions and literary sort of connivings, there will be a lot of different comments. You guys are big kids, so you will take out of this discussion what you need and chuckle about the rest, perhaps. Okay, I'm going to very quickly go around to everybody. Let's start, Amelia, with you over here. Just a quick, what was your reaction when you first read it, and what was your reaction after you read it as an actress, the play?
Well, I've had the privilege of acting in another one of Ned and Alex's co-written pieces, which Al directed, called 4 minutes or 5 minutes, if you bleed.
4
I don't
minutes.
actually, 4 minutes. That's a great start. And so I've come to just recognize this sort of characteristic playfulness and poignancy, which I recognized immediately in this script. I loved and was very stimulated and satisfied by the literary lineage to which it nods its hat. And I also thought that the different ways in which each of the female protagonists is recovering their lost voices was also very powerful. And that we see that same journey through the ages.
Just for fun, which part did you read when you read it? When you read the
Of course, with this complexion, I played the Victorian ghost, Rose.
Very well. Very well.
Well, we'll get back to that in a second. So just very quickly, Alexandria and Ned, you've worked before on a couple of plays then as writers. And
yeah, indeed.
How many times? Is this your second, third, fourth?
I think this is number 3, 4.
4 minutes if you bleed, Cross My Heart, Mouth to Mouth, and this, plus The Truth About Ruth, which was a bit of which was curtailed.
4.5.
4.5.
I think we may ask you how you work together in a bit.
It's really fun to watch.
Alice, a reaction to the play from a playwright.
Sure. Well, I really enjoyed it. I'm a longtime enjoyer and fan of those kind of Gothic milieus, and deeply enjoyed all the literary references, but also the amazing sense of place that the play gave. I like the female friendship at the heart of it. And I thought it was a really good look at this fascination that we have with those Gothic stories and what they evoke, but also, not shying away from at the heart of it, the heart of the mystery. And there's usually someone marginalized at the center who is kind of a ghost in more sense than one. And looking at how there is something more truly haunting beneath the ghost story that kind of came up around everything else.
Okay, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions in a minute. Ida, again, your reaction after you read it as an AD and a director. By the way, condolences, you lost not only a season, but you also were directing something at the Shaw Festival. So
yeah,
on all counts.
Heart's with you, Ida. My heart's with you.
Oh man. Well, I have to say, what I can just on that briefly, I just have to give a big shout out to the unending invention of actors, because we rehearsed on Zoom from March until May.
Oh wow.
Oh man.
Those wonderful, extraordinary people took on a Edwardian melodrama set in the American Revolution and never flagged.
Wow.
They just brought it every single day. It was really amazing. So,
Wow.
Right.
yeah.
What's the name of the piece, Ida? What was the name?
I was doing the only Shaw in the Shaw Festival this year. It was The Devil's Disciple.
Oh yeah,
The
fantastic.
only Shaw in the Shaw Festival.
I know.
Awesome.
How did I become the Shaw director? I don't even know how. That seems weird, but it was really fun. Great cast. We actually turned it into a radio play, and I'll see if we recorded it in little episodes, and we'll see if we can put it all together. So
Nice.
yeah, I'm going to call Paula Dankert and get her to be my Foley artist. So,
Okay. Back to the Silent Woman.
Yes. So I have to say the first thing I thought as I was reading it was, what is it with groceries and Alex? You know? I was sort of fascinated that you've got groceries in every play I've worked on.
It's a pandemic.
Right.
No, I really, I loved it in the way that you wound things around a variety of styles and forms and allusions, but always at the heart of this unseen world that we're just now unpacking culturally, and which is the unseen world of women who work, basically. And especially inside of the pandemic, thinking, you know, what it means to really do everything all day, every day for everyone. And then also, it reminded me of two different things. It reminded me a little bit of Arcadia in the sense of the two time periods glancing off of each other. And I was fascinated by the way you brought, I wondered, you know, as I was reading, I was wondering, you know, what would happen, you know, the awareness of Rose that something she couldn't cross into was interesting to me. I kind of found that really compelling, her own awareness and her desire to communicate. And I also thought of I think it's Mary Cassatt, the painter, who painted the interiors of women's lives. You know, she was the first one to do that. And so the interior, like, it's not just the interior settings of most of the scenes, except for the ones on the cliff, but the interiors of women's lives. And that comes back to being a writer, of, you know, writing a woman's story, and how that all folded so quite effortlessly, I thought, especially given that it's an early draft, that you folded that all in quite well. It was inside of the ghost story, you know, into the kind of classic ghost story. So bravo.
Okay. And Alain.
I just think it's so inventive and so fun in its theatricality, first off. And my first reading of it, I was wondering how the idea of the self-narration within the piece structurally would work. And so I had a bunch of question marks before hearing it read aloud. And then when it was read aloud, I was super, super pleased how seamlessly that worked. And one of the things, you know, just on a practical level, that lens is that they've taken this ghostly, crazy tale that takes place in a Gothic mansion on the cliffside in a pub and everything. And just practically speaking, you can do it anywhere, with anything. You can either do it with big production values and kind of like get that thing looking, or if you have no money, you can still, because of the device that's used, it allows you to explain and take us along in a black box if need be. And I think that's really fascinating, but mostly just well executed. It just really, really worked. And then one thing that I'm in deep admiration for is that, you know, sometimes the title of a play is just kind of something to call it or whatever.
Yeah.
But the metaphor of the silent woman throughout this play, no matter where you look, it's crazy how many different angles. The ghost who can't speak, can't get over there. The woman who is struggling to be able to get her play out. The idea of the woman who is pregnant and can't say anything about it because of her class in life, and the idea of the kind of pushing down on women and the silencing of women without hitting you on the head and saying metaphor, metaphor, metaphor. It just seems to always come back to its theme in a great way. So
is the writing, like, were you surprised when you read it? Was it different from what you'd read from Ned and Alex at any time? Like, was it new for you?
Yeah, definitely, because Well, it's very, in one way, very much a genre play, like someone mentioned, The Woman in Black. So it's very much in that tradition, but it has enough, like all of its own originality and its own execution that is different. But it is different from. But I also recognize a lot of they're very funny, and the repartee is. Consistently it pays off for
right, and you recognize the groceries too, so you knew it must have been Alex.
I didn't recognize. Usually there's I think thematically Alex is more prone to have a baby in danger of dying or a dead baby somewhere in her play than groceries, but maybe you're right, Ida. I'll look back over the oeuvre and see if there are as many babies in danger as there are groceries.
And again, Al, I totally agree with you, Anita, in that what is wonderful about this is that it allows theater to explode. It allows our imagination to go anywhere. Like the creators, when you're putting it together, it could be done like in 20 different ways, I think, and yet it's still based on the people. It's still based on the characters. It's not about the technology, even if you can explode it. And it flatters a theater because it asks everything of it, you know. And so I love that about it. Now, you talked about the narration, which is something that I was querying myself, and a number of people have asked about that as well. So in the script, for those of you who have not read it, an actor is designated as a narrator with an N, but it's either Cassie or Victoria who are the narrators, and they carry the burden almost like in a novel. It feels like it, and then they can switch very quickly back into the dialogue of their own character. There have been a number of comments about the confusion of that. How did you see this working? Could it be a voiceover in a narration style? Is it the actors turning to the audience? How does this work? I don't know, Alex or Ned. Who's that?
Well,
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly observe, this is, just furthering what Al said, that I think one of the reasons why the narration is so effective is because it's germane to women having agency and reclaiming their own stories. And that's why I thought it worked very seamlessly.
Yeah.
And I saw it done, so.
Yeah.
It wasn't confusing, and it was completely aligned with, especially in the case of Cassie, I think it is, trying to rebuild her life. A huge part of that journey is to rebuild your story and to speak it aloud.
Okay. The
I think Alice wants to say something.
Yeah, I also enjoyed the narration. It also made me think about questions of agency, but also the suggestion that Vicky and Cassie are frequently at liberty to share their innermost thoughts with us. They're at liberty to shape what we see of them and what we gauge from the subtext of what they're saying. Rose doesn't get that. It makes her a little bit more elusive in the early part of the play. So when she finally shares her story, it's the first time we're really kind of seeing her encased in the narrative.
Is it meant to be, you writers, is it the idea that the narration is a quote from the novel that Vicky is writing? Is that, I mean, I couldn't figure out, and if that's the novel that she's writing, how does it end up as a play? How do we end up with a play?
I mean, I think part of it is that's the magic of theater, that it's a play. But it's like what we were playing with the idea of is trying to capture the idea of somebody creating a novel. And so by the end of the play, like in the very last scene, there's no more narration because now we're just into the present moment of like their life where it is. But so throughout the rest of the play, the idea is that we are witnessing the play as it's being written, kind of thing. So that is part of what's happening with the narration. I mean, I had we questioned whether it would work or not. It's always hard to know with that kind of thing, you know, like, and in the readings it did work. I'm sure it's maybe more confusing to read it, but like when you actually hear it, actors are very good at being able to let you know, like when it's narrated, like it was very clear. But I mean, it is an ongoing question, and I think it would be something that you'd have to sort of figure out as well, like during rehearsals, and see and really kind of clarify exactly what it is and when it's happening and why. And
Right.
pertaining to Rose, Alice, I just wanted to ask you, because it is on purpose that we did the narration and Rose doesn't have her voice until she is able to have her voice at the end. But for you, was that something that you were finding very lacking, that you wanted her to have more of a say in the narration, or were you just sort of noting it?
I mean, I thought it was actually quite interesting because it very much did distinguish her from the other two women.
Okay.
And the fact that she doesn't have the luxury of that narration, she doesn't have the luxury of having that third person address to determine how the audience sees her. All she has is what she's willing to deliver to us directly.
Yeah, she's silent.
Yeah, it's another form of her silencing.
Mhm.
And yeah, I took a lot of notes in terms of like when Rose starts to confide, what she chooses to confide, what she kind of leaves unsaid, and what she cannot quite explicitly bring herself to say. That speaks to kind of the wider system that she's, enmeshed in. But I think because I remember you mentioned to me in terms of her having more agency, I think the fact that she does not kind of cast herself in the narrative does not necessarily negate from her having that agency. It's that she just hasn't reached that point that she's able to cast herself yet. Ultimately, she reaches that point over the course of the play with the other two women. They kind of help her further that. They let her be part of the narrative. I think that's a quote from Hamilton, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's also to do with the action, like the active, the active action of the play. When narration works, it's part of the act. It's not a stepping out of the action. It's part of the action. And I think that you've used it quite well, because I never, I've read it only once and I haven't heard it, so that's one thing. But I do think that the way you placed it, and because Rose doesn't have any of it, it does allow, that feels like it's them discovering the story in the moment. And what I'm interested by is what Rose's process is, because she's been trapped in the house as a ghost since the end of her life. People have come and gone from the house. They've experienced some element of her, but this is the first time that the people who have stayed long enough to actually give her a chance to figure out how the world works, because obviously what's happened is she's been trapped in a place where she never gets a chance. She's I was interested about the physical repetition of the only thing she knows is this repetition physically of cleaning. That then eventually, like, nobody else questioned the cleaning of that, you know what I mean? Like, and then they literally ask the right amount of questions to give her voice a chance to gives her a chance to cross the line.
Right. I was confused in terms of the timeline of Rose. At the beginning, she opens the door, she welcomes them. You have no sense at all that in this house something has happened, that she was, and I'm not totally clear on exactly what happened to her. Was she pushed down the stairs? Did she fall? How did that happen? But it doesn't seem like when she welcomes our two, Cassie and Victoria, when she welcomes them in, it doesn't seem like she has something she needs to tell them. And it doesn't feel like there's a burden on her shoulders or a past to it. And so I was confused about that. And I suspect there's a reason for that, and I couldn't understand what it was. By the way, I should say to anybody out there who's watching on Zoom or on Facebook, if anything that we say about this play intrigues you, you can still retroactively read it. Just go to the website, there's a link, and you will be given access to the script to read it. So once again, we're talking to Ned Cox and Alexandria Haber about the play that they are jointly writing, The Silent Woman. Sorry, going back to Rose and the timeline, and what is it? What is she at the opening when she opens the door? What state is she in that she would do that?
Well, we were talking about it the other day, and this is not necessarily going to be helpful, but it's always been my feeling that Rose gets stronger when she's nearest to Cassie,
Right.
because somehow Cassie seems to have a link, whether it's a supernatural one or an emotional one, or just being sensitive to something being wrong somewhere. But the closer they get and the more company they have together, the stronger Rose becomes and is able to reach out and begin to well up.
Bridge that, and then they bridge that gap, or bridge the whatever it is between life and the afterlife.
That's right.
I think it's arguably more fruitful for Rose to discover that she has something to say, and that there's a world in which she could possibly articulate it.
Yeah.
And I think we encounter at the beginning, and it would come alive more easily with the physical score, but that these ritualistic duties, is that what you turn them in the end?
Yeah.
Suggests to me somebody who's trapped in some sort of a purgatory of
That's what it
repetition,
feels like to me.
you
Is
know.
there's that the idea, and maybe it's because we have a collective idea of the rules of ghosts or whatever, but that there's some idea that there's some kind of ghost loop, that the ghost isn't in on everything. So they just keep on going around things and going, I know something's amiss, but I don't know all of it. And like, I think like Amelia said, that it gives the actor quite a lot of discovery and kind of going, what am I doing? And when that plate where she can't pick up the plate and she keeps on trying, you see maybe the first time where she's discovering where she is, you know?
And Cassie has the privilege, just by virtue of the time period in which she was born, of having been a fighter. Which again is as a model is totally novel for Rose.
What period have you guys? Is this 1850? Is this the time of Jane Eyre? Is when it was written, or when are we? Where are we in England, and what time frame are we in?
We figured it was around the 1860s.
Okay.
And we've placed them in Cornwall.
So Rose would be both Moira and Rose have a Cornish accent. Is that the idea?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I mean, not that it has to be.
I mean, yeah.
Amelia laughing.
Somewhere kind of remote where we could have a cliff. It needed to have that atmosphere, that kind of gothic-y atmosphere, you know? So we were really going for that in terms of a place. I think the conversation around Rose, though, is super interesting to me, because we're still kind of going back and forth about how much does she know, when does she know, how does she figure it out? Because I think there is something about, I mean, the idea of the ghostly world and the repetitive actions, for sure, in that, you know, it's what she knows how to do. And I think she is like going, there is something wrong, but I don't know what it is, but maybe if I keep doing this, I'll figure it out. And then when people come, I think that's the thing, like, and that's sort of something I think we still need to work on a bit, is that what is particularly different about when Cassie and like why can, like, maybe more of the idea of what is going on with Cassie that allows her to, because it's something different, right? Them being there is different, so that's starting to open up different worlds to her or something.
Is it possible that Rose would have a more immediate and instinctual relationship to Cassie, that she would sense that the pain and the story that's inside Cassie, and because they're so parallel, that maybe that might be what drives and pushes her a little bit more?
Yeah, that's part of what we were working with too, that they have similar stories in the sense of, you know, and
that's
paralleling their lives. I mean, Rose's was a much more tragic ending, but that idea and like having
that's what's nice, awesome in that, I think, is that that idea that in 1850 or 18 whatever, that women had no rights, whatever. And then we fast forward to 2020, and there's this woman whose husband has all the money and the lawyers and is able to make her look like some kind of hysterical whatever. And that anyway, it's a really great time travel to be able to say it's not all done.
Yeah.
I like the suggestion.
Well, yeah, I think you. Oh, sorry, Alice. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I mean, I liked the suggestion that at the beginning she is caught in ritualistic duties, but it's also like a cycle of silence, obedience, and hospitality. Like the first time she said company's coming, that's completely what she would have said, 150 years ago.
Yeah.
And then on second read, I registered more clearly that like at the beginning, it is all part of the ritualistic duties. And then I think it's on page 20, she really clocks that something has broken the cycle. She's no longer able to fulfill them. She's broken through some kind of barrier, because until then, the two women have generally been kind of accepting that these things just keep happening with these silent and unseen servant. And I like, I think we're talking about like how it's the shared trauma between her and Cassie that allows her to break through. But there's also the sense that both of them, the last time they stood up and pushed back, it ended in defeat.
Yeah, nice. Yeah.
And Cassie's like stayed several times to be, quite defeated, and she was always seeing the glass half empty, but there's a different kind of
Yeah.
And both of them kind of start to begin to push back together. And for
Mhm.
Rose, that means breaking the cycle of the ritualistic duties and starting to connect and starting to share her story. And I wondered also like what we could see in Cassie, and that she's kind of been unable to share maybe with Vicky. Like how is she kind of also trapped in that cycle of silence in her own life?
And
Mhm.
would Vicky not sense more or know more, but that what Cassie's been through, so that we get just somehow, Cassie seems too normal at the beginning, or too, do you know what I mean? That whatever's happened to her isn't resonating enough to kickstart something for me. I don't know whether that makes any sense to anybody else.
Mhm.
Well, I think I was interested by actually the nature of female friendship that you explored in it between the two women, and the idea too of archaeological investigation of a story. It reminds me too. Jackie used to have at the Shaw like an archaeological dig into old plays to find, like, we literally did plays that somebody found in the basement of Samuel French by a woman, like that had been big hits and they'd forgotten that they'd been a hit. And so Rutherford and Son was the one that was Gita Sowerby. And I felt like there was something about the need to, women's stories get sort of such kind of stereotypical short shrift in terms of the tragic story of the maid who got knocked up and then felt, pushed down the stairs so that no one would know. And but the play actually uses the need to find the details and find out what was the story. And that's actually what I think Rose says at one point. No, you're telling it wrong. You have to, that's part of what helps her break through, is the need for it to be actually the story.
Yeah.
And so, and the same for, I guess, for Cassie, and how her story gets unearthed isn't quite, I think what you're sort of alluding to, Guy, is that the way Cassie's story gets teased out feels not quite as defined or as built in, I guess.
Okay, but it's more than that. It's she almost walks off a cliff, right? I mean, we get the Gothic elements in here. She almost walks off the cliff. Up to that point, we haven't seen, or we don't feel like it's more like an accident as opposed to something that's driven from the inside of her. That should be, leave it to the writers to choose the motivation, but whatever is going on inside her should be what drives her to draw to, it's not just an accidental sleepwalk that she's going to go off the cliff. There's something so horrendous inside her that the solution is to walk off the cliff. And we don't have that sense of what's the power that is of the story of what's happened to her, I think. Just, again, it's just the old term of raising the stakes, a little bit, some way.
Perhaps
Sorry.
if we, sorry.
Yeah, Alice?
Perhaps if we start to see flickers of a Rose trying to connect with her more strongly in earlier moments, like the cliff walk.
Yeah.
And Cassie trying to connect with her, even if it's, somnambulist, or if that's the word. She does it later when she's awake, but if she's doing it now in her dreams, And, you know, at this point, Rose has already realized that there's the potential to connect with this person. She's desperate to do it, maybe enough to, you know, inadvertently cause her to walk off a cliff. But if we can see her starting to kind of try harder and realize that there might be the potential to finally share her story. And then at the end, when she finally does, both of them are kind of freed by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Makes sense to me. If it's 1850 and they're lords, I'm sorry, I can't help but think of Downton Abbey. Are there not more employees in the house, or is it really just a maid and a cook? I mean,
there could be other employees, but
I'm not asking for more characters. As a producer, we don't want more.
and I don't think they'd all be like I don't know that there'd be a bunch of ghosts roaming around. It's pretty ridiculous.
It's a very valid question you're asking, Guy. There are just as many servants as were useful to us to make the plot of the play advance.
I mean, we could make
Keep it producible.
Yeah.
Right. But no, to be serious, that's a very good question.
I like the sense that it was, because I think they allude at some point to that there were people, but they sent them away to keep the secret.
Yeah, the cook.
So I kind of saw it as one of those places where someone arrives in the dead of night and asks where are all the other servants, and they've all been sent away to harbor some murder mystery. But that's kind of the sense I got of it. And probably the place was getting pretty dilapidated because of that when they finally moved off to London, and maybe she was the last person left.
Yeah, I think maybe there's the one question that I had. I didn't quite have a good sense of the lady, Lord and Lady Granville. I had a more sense of him than I did of her, so that her, whatever was going on with her, happening that made it hard for her to relate to her husband. You know, that felt a little bit easy to me. I mean, obviously. There's only I'm not you don't have to tell everything, all the detail, but I just didn't quite completely, because that could explain too why there's not so many servants. You know, like there could be a reason for that in this house.
It's a choice that the Lord and Lady make because they're somewhat bizarre. That's how they choose to live.
I think that there's that idea too of like, you know, you have the sense with like Rochester doesn't have, or you know what I mean, he doesn't have a lot of servants because he's got a crazy lady in the attic. There's a few people you trust in your house. But I think it's a really good point, and I hadn't thought of it at all, because I think we were just using, I don't know if Ned did, but we were using the Lord and Lady stories kind of like we hadn't invested too much in that idea, but now that you mention it, it's also a lost opportunity because she was also silenced, the lady of the house, you know, and that would be another way of linking it all up.
And it's another totally limiting
role.
Yeah, where you're only legitimized and your existence is only validated by whether or not you can churn out a baby.
Yeah.
But what happens to the woman who's incapable of that?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Al, you were waving your finger there.
Yeah, I think I thought it was addressed. Maybe I'm misremembering it, but I thought Moira's grandma used to work there, and then she was sent away. Boom, one day, and without any explanation. And in my mind, I just leapt to, oh, well, because Rose is pregnant, what they've done was shut stuff down. Mm-hmm. Buddy's got a plan where he's going to keep the baby, and just everybody else gets sent away. And I kind of looked at the timeline on that and thought that's what happened, but I don't know if I read into that. But
no, I think that is what we were thinking about. But I guess my understanding from what other people are saying now is that the idea of like, would there have been more servants, and what was the actual deal with the Lady Grenville?
Yeah,
that's the most important thing to me. The like, what's going on with her? That could just be fleshed
No, I know,
out.
but that's the only thing I was addressing was that were there more servants? There
Right.
were, until Rose got pregnant,
Right.
and then he fired everyone except for Rose. That was where my brain went when I.
Yeah.
Right.
But maybe I.
Yeah, I guess, and I was just kind of curious about what drove him into Rose's bed, just in the sense of, obviously, I mean, there's the cliched thing of the man of the house gets to sleep with everybody, but there seemed to be more there than that. He wasn't a stereotypical I mean, the men of that period had a hard time escaping the world that they were in too. So there was, it was a question.
Did you deliberately stay away from getting too detailed about exactly what happened and the character of the Lord? And was that a choice that you made to avoid the cliche, but do you not feel the lack of a kind of villain energy in the sense, or am I just looking for the obvious here?
I mean, we did make a choice to kind of stay away from it in terms of it being overtly like, we wanted, I guess, people to draw their own conclusions and to, we thought it was clear enough that Rose's options were taken from her, that she really didn't have a fighting chance in the situation she was in. I wasn't super comfortable having it become like a rape situation, not because I feel like that felt to me like something that I wouldn't want to put forth and then not address in some way.
But Alex, we didn't.
No, I don't think we did.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah. But I guess, yeah, so maybe that kind of leaves it sort of in the middle. But that was the idea, is that I would like to stay away from it seeming to be a rape.
That's right.
And I think it's interesting, the idea of a man's role too, and what that could be, so.
I think there's the suggestion that they connect through literature, that he doesn't have the same way of confiding in his wife that he actually finds in her.
Because she's a reader.
Yeah. And I did, there is a definite imbalance of power here. So, however consensual it may have been, he had seen it.
Totally. Yes.
Complicated too. It's
Yeah.
I think it's more lifelike and interesting in the way that you've written it.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, because we get the sense, if we're paralleling to the other, to Cassie's story, the more of a betrayal there is on his part, the more hopes of happiness she had with him, the more cruel it is that he takes her child from her and uses her in that way.
I like in the play as it is that angle to it, where he says one thing to her, and then when it comes to the practical application of that thing, he just dismisses her and says, no, that's not how it's going to go. It's actually going to be our baby, and you're just going to have to deal with it. And I thought that parallel worked really great with Cassie's situation. But the metaphor or the parallel that I forgot, what I really love in the play, on top of all the other ones with the silent woman, is the Bronte pen name, is how she had to publish under her pen name, and that they talk about that, and that's just another one of those loops of the silent woman, that a woman, a smart super intelligent, amazing novelist, couldn't publish under her own name at the time. Anyway.
It's kind of like in A Doll's House Part 2, just that, the original play is set in one time, this sequel is set however many years later, and yet that final conversation that they have about marriage at the end is one that could be happening in any kitchen across the world in this moment. And just by drawing that thread, it's kind of, without a heavy-handed way of showing us that we have not made much progress in terms of that sort of domestic dynamic.
I'm wondering if, again, going back to Upstairs, Downstairs, or Downton Abbey, the class structure, if it's a little bit more ingrained in Rose's world, if that also isn't, going to help in that story. I mean, I love it that, as we said, that the connection is through, she's a reader, and it's through words, and the possibility that might get her out of that situation that she's in. But we Canadians, when we do deal with England, we just bypass the whole class structure and how ingrained that is, and part of that universe,
But it's in the New World as well, isn't it? Because the as somebody just said, as soon as the guy snaps his fingers and pays the right amount to the right lawyer, Cassie loses everything, you know. And that's maybe not the class structure, but it's an economic class structure. And
yes, it's not a class structure in that sense, but it is a financial structure. Yes, money is power for sure.
And money is in men's hands. It's still, you know, the power structure that travels through men. Without it being, I do appreciate that you tease that out without it being about a victimhood. It's a systemic.
Right.
Reality that then is the link that becomes what they through time find each other around in an interesting kind of way.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anything more, Amelia, on Rose from the inside? Any other, when you read it, any other feelings or any of the other characters as you were hearing them being read initially?
Well, one thing that we discussed after the last reading, and I don't know if you incorporated any of those notes before sharing this draft, but was just about some questions around why Rose seems to revert suddenly to sort of typical ghost behavior when they're in the basement. She suddenly starts, it seems that she's sort of manipulating the journal and the drawer, slamming in and out of the desk, whereas theretofore she's kind of behaved very humanly. So what is it that prompts this this kind of tactic?
Urgency, I think.
Yeah. But especially as she's seemingly coming closer to self-actualizing and speaking and sharing her story. So my question was, wouldn't that bring her kind of more into an embodied state?
Yeah.
So that was just one thing that, I think that we left with Alex and Ned to discuss further. And then the big, I thought, accomplishment from the first draft to the second draft was the way in which Moira's story had evolved. And Al had given the great prompt that perhaps they imagined that it was her story and from her perspective. And so she went from sort of being like a kind of peripheral comedic character to one who was equally engaged in.
Yeah.
And who had stakes in the outcome of this story.
An absolutely great character. Somebody's gonna...
Yeah.
I was interested. No one had mentioned her yet. I was gonna.
Yeah.
It's a fourth character.
You know what? Then I will put a spanner in the works because I still have an issue with Moira. I wonder about the practical necessity of comic relief in a play that's already comedic. I wonder, as just a practical, pragmatic, why is Moira in the play? Would it not be a lot more effective and helpful to have her be the serious character who is going, there are ghosts. There really are ghosts. I really believe in ghosts. I totally believe in ghosts. Oh no, I was totally bullshitting. Fuck, ghosts are real? As opposed to being, I never believe her. I don't believe her ever. She's there and she makes me laugh. And I wonder if that's as practical to help tell your story.
Great note. That's a good note. Thank you.
You can see Alex is making notes from the basement.
I made notes from everybody.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Al, because she did feel slightly like in a different play to the other characters to me. Just I wouldn't have been able to say as articulately as what you expressed, but I felt that she was in Corey Street and and the others were in Downton or Pretty Little Lies or
the yellow wallpaper. Also reminds me of that a little bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it's not, Ali, we shouldn't think that we're putting spanners in the works here. Ned and Alexandria, they're going to take what they want from this discussion and forget about the rest. So we shouldn't be censoring ourselves. I don't think. As long as
I think it's a great note, and I think it's something, Alex, if you're cool with it, we might have a good look at it.
so I'm going to throw out the question here. This is a Gothic play novel. The ultimate, in both cases, the action happens off stage. We hear the sound of her falling down the stairs. We don't see it. My worry and question is the dark side strong enough in the play at the moment? You know, I need to up the quotient of the goth in there maybe a little.
I wonder on that. I know exactly what you mean, Guy, and I wondered too if maybe we got too much too soon, so the tension of it wasn't as tight as it could have been. So that I don't, this is a very unformed thought, but it was just something that occurred to me when I read it, that I felt like I kind of knew where it was going a little too soon in Rose's story. And so then the sort of suspense of knowing that something's going to happen, but not sure what, wasn't quite as much as I would have liked to give us that really Gothic feel. And that real ghost story thing. And that may relate back to Moira unleashing the tension on some of that. So, but I think that there was a tension issue for me in terms of the suspense. So that when the cap comes off the bottle, I'm not ahead of the character.
Mm-hmm.
As a audience member.
There's also a fine line to walk, I think, in that I enjoy that Moira will be like, yes, there are ghosts, and then she'll completely undercut that. But I think the risk with that is she does have the potential to undercut some of that tension by mocking it. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, to kind of keep that moving with the Gothic story, are there high stakes in the fact that she is undercutting it, that she is kind of convincing Cassie it's nothing, you're fine? Whereas, you know, what Cassie really needs is to kind of find the truth of that story, and is to kind of listen and discover the darkness rather than kind of dismiss it as something that was just kind of what Moira presents as, you know, they just went off to London and adopted a kid.
To me, if you're saying that Cassie can drive the quest a bit more, that to me that makes sense. At the moment, the Cassie that I see on stage and that we meet seems quite almost a normal human being, whereas she had the strength and the courage, and maybe, you know, was just driven so far as to sort of kidnap her own kid, or at least disappear with her. So that is a sign of someone, you know, seriously trying to fight back in some way. And yet when she walks on, she seems like a very normal, you know, I don't get the jumble inside her emotions. So.
I wonder if like some of that could be redressed by having her trying a little more actively to figure out how to connect at the beginning. Because if you've got Moira, just you know, you do have that kind of, if you have Rose who's kind of pulling Cassie towards her in the truth, and if you have Moira who, since her ancestor was sent away, has actively been kind of pulling away from that truth and using it for her own devices rather than kind of trying to get to the heart of the story. Because for me, it was a little jarring when her great-great-grandmother appeared to her at the end and said, "Thank you, you've kind of released us from this burden of silence." Because it didn't feel like she'd been kind of moving towards that unless we saw more clearly that she didn't really want to accept, you know, for all her bluster and her laughing and her making light of it, there was a real need not to accept that something really dark had happened there, and that her ancestors were part of it. I just wonder if that could kind of keep the Gothic stakes aligned, but still kind of let Moira be the comic.
Well, I think Ned has often advocated for it to be scarier, which I think a little bit is along these lines. And what I'm hearing, it's provoking a lot of thoughts in me, and that, you know, what is serving Moira's story in this is like, it's serving Moira's story for the place to not be haunted and to be rented out a lot so she gets more money. So she would be like kind of putting down those rumors as opposed to like building them up. And certainly Cassie would be a thorn in her side if all of a sudden Cassie was coming in with like, you know, I'm getting this, I'm feeling this. And also the idea of, you know, and that's a very Gothic character too, right? In all the novels, there's always the housekeeper who's like, I know the secrets, but nobody's going to know them, you know? And then also the idea of Cassie as well, you know, maybe really questioning, am I losing my mind? Like, you know, like in the Turn of the Screw, like the governess, like, you know what I mean? Like, where, like, if it's longer before we find out who Rose is, and if it's a bit, you know, that might serve the story a lot. It's true.
There was something that came up where she notices the things on the tray and knows what they are, like the,
Yeah.
And that was it seemed like a little missed opportunity to me. I thought, like I suddenly went, well, she's not, why does she know? Like, what? How does she know that? And then we didn't kind of go anywhere with that. But I thought, if she suddenly is like, if in that sort of where you suddenly know things you didn't know you knew, and it's sending you somewhere, there was something cool about that little detail that jumped out at me.
And it's odd, in the stage directions, Rose clocks it but doesn't get it. She's confused by it. So I'm with you. I was more like, oh, I missed something. Like I thought maybe I missed what that moment was about, because Rose was clearly confused and Cassie did know it. Yeah.
Can I ask you guys, Alexandria Haber and Ned Cox, we're talking about your play, The Silent Woman here. You guys have worked together before. We established this is your fourth time. How are you going to go away from this, and how does the next draft happen? How do you work together?
Oh, I quit, for one thing.
Nice.
Well, you know, given the new rules of the world, we've been working on Zoom, which is really new for us.
Who had the idea for this play?
We always kind of get them together. I can never unconnect the threads very well. I'll be sitting there and I'll go, wow, that's some great writing I did there. And then I'll go, wait, Alex did that bit. And vice versa, you know, I'll be thinking, oh, you know. It
kind of morphed. I'm not sure you know, we started it and it kind of morphed into different things. I think we knew we wanted to write a ghost story. We just weren't sure like how to get into it, and this sort of happened. Yeah. But I mean, probably like actually what we'll do is we'll go away, we'll get on Zoom tomorrow, we'll read our notes. Yeah. And then lately what we've been doing is we put the script up on share screen.
That's
and
fantastic.
Ned writes.
Yeah, that works
and we talk. Usually we work in the same room. Yeah. Often we work in the same room and we just kind of go back and forth and both have our computers. Sometimes we get
absolutely hysterical fun to watch. I'm just going to say, they both got their laptops and then they start like kind of like dialoguing and saying, and it's like, no. And then they'll rewind and then like say it again and then like look up and go, no. And then it's absolutely super fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a good time, and mostly we agree. Sometimes we don't, but mostly we do. And then
almost always, yeah.
Usually Ned gives in quicker than me.
How did you meet? How did you find out that you shared a writing capacity together?
That was a fun, actually. That's a great story.
Well, we met in a unit. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you do that part. I'll do the next part.
We met in a unit. We were in a unit at Playwrights workshop, and that's how we met initially. And then Ned wrote a play that I did, that I was in, called Elevator, that we did in a freight elevator with Michel Perron and Neil Napier, and Al directed it, and it was super, super fun.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And then I think what happened was the 4 Minutes If You Bleed story came out of, there was the Zoo Fest that was part of the Just for Laughs, like maybe 10 years ago, I'm not even sure. And they had decided to have this component where they were going to have scripted plays. And somehow I got a part in that play, like I got a spot. And then I realized that I didn't have a play. And then I started writing a play and I was like, oh my God, I'm panicked. And then I called Ned and I was like, do you think we can write a play in 3 days if we do it together? And he was like, yeah, okay, I'm game. And so
but the great thing was,
we literally wrote the play in I think maybe a week. And then we were like, so necessity, right, is the mother of invention. And then
But the great thing was she said, the only thing is we have to follow. Al's given me a challenge. And so every scene has to open with fuck.
I don't remember that at all.
Yeah, you'd given a very specific.
I don't know why that was so.
Desperately trying to come up with ways that it would be like easier to write it. Well, just do this, just do that. And then the end, I was like, there's no way I can do it. I need another person.
Anybody
was
have
fun.
anybody want to have the last word in here?
Say it again.
Anybody want to have the last word on the play? Well, I hope we've been of some help.
A lot of help.
Oh, very.
We've been in the chat room with Alexandria Haber and Ned Cox, talking about the early draft of their play, The Silent Woman. If anything that you've heard here actually makes you want to read the play, you just go to the Infinite Theatre website. There's a link, and you can still retroactively read this play, read the previous two plays. And next week, we're in the chat room with Marianne Ackerman and her play, Black Dog. Thursday next week, 5 o'clock. Thank you very much, Al, Ida, Alice.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Guys,
Alex and Ned. That was great. Thank you very, very much.
helpful. Thanks a lot.
All right. All the best. And Morgandy, that's it. Over and out.